So welcome everybody. Thank you all for being here. Before we get started, in the spirit of reconciliation, Alongside Families acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. My name is Pam and I'm joining you today from the Ngunnawal, from the land of the Ngunnawal people. So welcome to our medical information series. I'm really excited about today because we're going to hear from Janet Burke from Holding Space Counselling, and she's going to explore the complex and often overlooked emotional impact of medical trauma for parents of children with disability and provide us with some invaluable tips to better care for ourselves so we can continue to support our children. Before I hand it over to Janet, I'm just going to cover a little bit of housekeeping to ensure that everyone gets the most out of today's session. So today's session will run for about 30 minutes. This session is being recorded. So in the next couple of days, everyone who has registered will receive a link to the recording. And Janet has very kindly agreed to share her presentation slides. So you will receive a copy of all of the slides that are shared with us today. To ensure that it's a smooth experience for everyone today, I will learn to speak properly. If you need any assistance with technical support, please use the chat function. If you have any questions about the content, please use the question and answer box. So we will be addressing questions in the question and answer section at the end, provided we have enough time for everything. And just an important note about privacy, as I've already mentioned, this session is being recorded for future viewing. So just please be mindful of this when asking questions and engaging in the chat. And please refrain from taking screenshots or making your own recordings without permission. So without further ado, Janet, I'm going to hand over to you. Welcome.
Great, thank you, Pam. And I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation today at home. I'm actually, before I bring up my slides, I'm going to start. I was saying to Pam, I need to own and apologise for the confusion yesterday. I did not implement very good self-care. I had a fairly big week in my life happening last week and didn't say, maybe can we do it after the school holidays? And there was a mix up with emails and I completely had muddled up my diary. So I say that in the spirit of letting people know that when I talk to you about self-care, it doesn't mean by any means that I've mastered it. It's a constant learning thing, right? And we constantly pick up new tips.
Always work in progress.
Always a work in progress. So can people now see my screen? Is that working?
Not yet. Give it a second. Oh, there's action. Yes, beautiful.
Okay, got it. Okay. So when we discussed what sort of topics were important to this group, this one is one, I guess, that resounded with your beautiful organisation and with me and a lot of the work. So I have this counselling practice, which I'm very passionate about, and my other hat, which we're not so much focusing on today, is that I work at the Kids Hospital in Randwick and I manage the Child Life and Music Therapy team. So I have a good breadth of understanding, I guess, about the impact of chronic illness and disability on carers. And the thing for me that is really linked, that we thought connected topics that kept coming up for you guys is, we know, and I'll go through the stats in a second, that medical trauma is a really big issue. And I know from practice and from working with different families, some of the small things we can do to help. And also, I guess, the thing that I'm keen to get through the presentation and address some of your questions, also just the things that people can say are best practices of self-care without actually fully understanding the context in which you're operating. And it's not possible, for example, to go to the gym 5 days a week for an hour class when you're a carer. And sometimes people say things in a spirit of care, but without good understanding, that are really not helpful and are quite insensitive. So in terms of the context. I know that in this group, you guys have talked about this concept of medical traumatic stress, and we don't need to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I guess what I wanted to do in presenting this is just to validate you guys that pediatric traumatic medical stress refers to having distressing psychological and physiological responses to pain, injury, serious illness, medical procedures, invasive or frightening treatment. And what we know, and I updated this data recently, is that 16% of children and young people and up to 23% of parents and carers met criteria for pediatric traumatic medical stress simply after having a simple surgery. Now, some of the kids in that cohort may have had something complex, but some of those kids have just had their appendix out. So we know that in the medical system, there are things happening that are not going well, that are not allowing the time and space for people to experience safety, to have their questions answered comprehensively. We know that it's a giant system and things don't always go ideally. And I don't know if it's reassuring at all, but there are lots of us on that side of the fence really trying to speak to our colleagues and say there's simple, small things you can do that make a massive difference to these stats. And they're really about taking a moment, taking people's concerns seriously, understanding that parents and carers know their kids best of all. And if they're asking you a question or bringing you a concern or telling you a history, it's really important that you pay attention to that. So yeah, this slide really just is about validating the fact that what you've all had conversations about and the experience that many of you have had, and I'm very sorry you've had that experience, is very real. And there's a lot of evidence to say it's real. And I'm certainly doing a lot of teaching in the context of healthcare to try to get staff to do some of the things to minimize that. But I think what's important, and I don't know if anyone else has spent much time recently just reflecting on what a crazy time in world history we're living in, particularly if we think about having come through COVID, if we think about politics in the US at the moment, and that really coming back to we can't control the whole hospital system. We can't control even a department within a hospital. What we have autonomy and control over is ourselves. So for me, I'm really passionate about this topic of self-care because I think, which this slide alludes to, as often happens in the Western world, it's been taken and commercialized. So we often hear about self-care in the context of get a facial, buy a beautiful candle, buy this fancy journal, go on a holiday. And I'm not trying to minimize, all of those things can be a component and an important part of self-care. But often the things that don't feel so appealing are what actually constitutes the self-care that we need regularly and routinely. And those things can be getting on top of organization and to-do lists, eating more healthily, moving our bodies, getting to bed on time, doing things that really aren't as fun as, wouldn't we all love it if every day we could go have a facial and have our hair done? But it often isn't that glamorous. It's kind of put out as this, self-care. And what in reality it is can often be hard to motivate ourselves towards. Conversely, and really important to note, sometimes self-care, and this probably sounds a little bit confusing and like I'm contradicting myself, sometimes self-care is about letting those things go. So if you are a person who is naturally very engaged in moving your body, and I wish I was that person. I wish every morning I woke up wanting to go exercise for an hour. I am not that person. But if you're that person, self-care for you might be not beating yourself up if for 3 days you can't go for a run. Actually being compassionate about that and going, this week has just been a complete and utter cluster mess and it's not possible. And that's okay. I'm not going to then be judging myself or speaking to myself harshly about that. It might be as extreme, is a very extreme word to use, but it might be letting yourself have a nap if that's possible. And I've put a little link here. I've tried to litter this short presentation with lots of resources that I really love that you guys might find helpful. The woman whose website is here has started a thing called the NAP Ministry. And she's like, in this capitalist system that we live in, our worth is what we produce and what we do and our activity. I say no to that. I say when my body's tired, I'm going to rest. And so I think there's something very powerful about that. So this tricky thing, I love the word dialectic, which is that two opposing things can be true at the same time. So self-care can be the boring routine things that 6 nights of the week I try to cook a healthy meal, but on the 7th night I let myself have takeout and I don't feel bad about it. That 5 days a week I try to exercise, but if one week I can only do 3 because life's been really tough, that's okay. I've done the best that I can. And so for me, and I think sometimes this term self-compassion gets a bit of a woo-woo, you know, people are like, oh, that's a little bit too far of a stretch. But I've put a couple of resources on this slide because for me, real self-care is only possible when we can actually be self-compassionate. And self-compassion sounds like a really big thing, but I love this little graphic. Self-compassion is being able to say, after my like horror yesterday of saying to these guys, no, you didn't send it to me, it's not confirmed, and then opening my Zoom calendar and going, oh my God, I forwarded it from my other email address and never even saw it there. My mistake. Going, okay, I'm not happy about that, but I'm human. I'm not perfect. Perhaps in retrospect, I should have set boundaries and said this week wasn't a great week. It's about being able to say, I made a mistake, but I'm not a mistake. It's about being able to say, I'm feeling angry today, not I am angry. And there's a couple of resources here. The first one is one of my favorite podcasts of all time. I don't know if anyone in this group knows the work of Glennon Doyle, but she has this podcast called We Can Do Hard Things with her partner, Abby Wambach, and her sister. And this conversation is about what really is self-care. What does it really mean to look after ourselves? And it's a beautiful conversation about all the stuff I've been talking about. And the other resource here is this amazing academic who many of you may know. And if you don't know her, I think you'll find her work incredibly powerful. So Kirsten Neff is an academic at university in Texas, and she has devoted her entire career to the concept of self-compassion. I love her website and the stuff that she puts out, because if you subscribe to her newsletter, you'll just get things like a 3-minute meditation. She actually came across this work when her son was diagnosed as autistic, and she went through that process of transitioning to accept this diagnosis and what that would mean for their lives. And so her work is very aligned with the experience that a lot of you guys have, and her work is very real life, I guess, in terms of the resources that she puts out are not find 45 minutes to sit in a darkened room and meditate. They're like, this stuff can be hard. So here's a 90-second meditation. Here's a 4-minute meditation. Here's the phrase that you can use. And so what her work really centers around is pretty simple. It's like, when something really difficult happens and I feel hurt or angry or distressed or shamed or guilty, that I say to myself these kind of things. I'm just human. There are other people who feel like this. I'm not alone in this. And I can be with this right now and know that it is going to be different. And I could do the whole talk, and perhaps at another time we can dip into how important it is for all of us to actually learn to be present with and process our feelings, and the terrible implications it has for our health if we try to bypass the feelings and emotions that we experience. But check out Kirsten's work. It's absolutely beautiful. It's able to be integrated into real life. She has a beautiful book called Fierce Self-Compassion for Women. She's on lots of podcasts. She appears on Glenn and Dora's podcast. So if you don't have time to read a book, you can listen to the podcast. If you don't have time to listen to a podcast, you can do her 4-minute meditation. But she has a beautiful body of work that basically literally says, if we can make the time to make self-compassion a practice in our lives, we actually are generally far happier. I think the statistic is insane. It's like 70% happier. We actually are healthier within ourselves, and we're able to better do self-care because we genuinely are giving ourselves the love and respect that we give to other people. So please check her work out. It's beautiful. We've talked about this in terms of hard things like exercise, eating healthy meals when all you want to do is have the hot chips because the day's been completely exhausting and you don't want to chop the vegetables and stir fry them. But self-care also sometimes involves having difficult conversations. And I know you guys are warriors in this space, that many of you have had to have hard conversations with daycare centres, with schools, with individual carers or teachers, with medical professionals. It can really take a toll, but it's very important in terms of us not carrying that stuff with us, that we make the time and space between where we've had the initial reaction, which might be, how dare that person speak to my child that way? And I cannot believe they just did that. And okay, give ourselves a moment of self-compassion. Oh, that was horrible. It shouldn't have happened. I'm in this beautiful community. I know that I'm not the only one who's had this experience. I'm not alone in this. I can come back to feeling a bit more grounded. And when we're in that responsive state, work out a safe time and place. Sometimes that difficult conversation might need to happen in writing. Maybe that person is quite powerful or seems aggressive, but just making sure that we put our needs and our side of the story on the table. Sometimes, again, conversely, it means setting boundaries. So there may be, for example, a nurse on the ward and you've tried 3 times to have the difficult conversation about why they're not doing what you need done. They're not using the peg appropriately for your child and it could cause infection, or you've seen them not wash their hands, whatever the issue might be. Maybe then it is about setting a boundary. If you've made a genuine attempt to have the difficult conversation and you're being brushed off or they're ignoring you, maybe it's a family member who's constantly insensitive when you talk about the absolute exhaustion of being a 24/7 carer and finding it really difficult to get a break. Sometimes it's about boundaries. I'm actually going to end this phone call if you continue shouting at me. I'm actually going to go and speak to the NUM if you can't actually do what I've asked in terms of the care of my child on the ward. I'm sure this is a big one for lots of you guys, having some boundaries because your caring duties are so large between work and yourselves. I actually am not responding to work emails outside of work, and I need to make it clear that's not possible. So boundaries are really important. And the other thing that I would add into that, and again, many of you probably know the work of Dr. Becky Kennedy, but if you don't, check it out. I personally, in general, hate a parenting expert, particularly the ones who've never had children. They really get up my nose. But Becky Kennedy is a for real, legitimate hero, I think, in this sphere, which is a pretty strong word. But the links that I've put here are to her work around discussing the idea of repair. And any of you guys who have an Instagram account will have been flooded with stuff on boundaries. And I saw a beautiful post the other day where this woman was like, there's a little bit too much talk about boundaries and not enough talk about repair. Like a boundary sometimes is easier. Sometimes it's easier to go, I'm shutting that person out of my life and I'm not going to have anything to do with them, than it is to sit down and say, I notice that when X happened, I felt really like you don't care about me. And it actually, you might go as far as say, it actually reminded me of when I was a kid and I felt unseen when these things happened. And I need to talk to you about how we can do this differently in the future. And in Becky Kennedy's stuff, because she's a parenting expert, she talks a lot about how important repair is, not just for us, but for our children. It might be for our partners. So the concept really is that we come back, and again, these two resources are in terms of our kids. Say, for example, it's the end of the day, and I imagine for many of you, another topic I'm very passionate about is siblings. You've had a really rough day at the hospital. People have been horrendous. Appointments have run late. You didn't get to eat lunch. There were issues with parking, all the stupid, terrible things that hospitals seem to come with. And you've come home and you've just lost your temper at the other kids who've said something like, when's dinner going to be ready? And you're like, are you kidding me? I have had the worst day. I can't, but can you just give me 10 minutes to breathe? Again, bit of self-compassion. Oof, that's not the mum I usually am. I'm only human. I've heard other mums say this. Becky Kennedy's stuff on repair is really about coming back and providing that context. So saying, I need you to hear that it wasn't okay that I lost my temper at you. And my losing my temper at you really had next to nothing to do with you. I had a really tough day, and I've got people to support me with that, because we want to make sure, obviously, that our kids don't feel burdened with adult stuff. But I'm going to keep working on how I can get the help I need so it doesn't build up and I just lose my temper because I'm really grumpy. And it's Becky, of course, says it far more articulately than I ever will. This is a really core part of her work. So please, again, check out those links. But this idea that we come back to people, we give context, we take responsibility. Another person that I'm reading at the moment who I love, called Britt Frank, who's written a book about being stuck, she frames it all around amends. She's like, sometimes an apology is a little bit tokenistic. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. But actually making amends is, I know I did this. I imagine it really hurt your feelings, and I'm going to try to do differently next time in this way. And then obviously we show that through our actions. But a really important for our own self-reflection, and vitally important for kids, because what kids do is, if we lose our minds, and I do it with my kids, then what they don't go, oh, mum's had a tough day and she's just lost her temper. They go, I'm not a great kid. Particularly little kids, they make it about themselves. And so this concept of repair is very important. So, I mean, all of you have the power of Google. You could find many. When I Googled, I found so many. I feel like we're very lucky to live in a time where there's so many beautiful artists and therapists online making these resources accessible, but some beautiful ideas here, that comparison is never great in terms of self-care, that we all have habits that we don't love, and maybe we take small actionable steps to change those, that sometimes ceasing social media or unfollowing certain people is a really powerful thing for self-care. For some people, therapy is something that's accessible and can be really helpful. And I know there's a couple of different organisations like Carers Gateway where you might be able to access some help. So lots of ideas there. And you can see a lot of the stuff I've been talking about, that compassion is central to it, that actually taking action. And I love this idea that sometimes that action might be boundaries on yourself. They might not be external boundaries, they might be internal boundaries. That it's about seeking support, that we all need connectedness, and it's about making sure that we're telling ourselves and others the truth of the situation that we're in. But I guess for me, the linchpin, and you've heard me allude to it today, is really that this whole concept of self-care, if it's I'm going to run a marathon in 12 months, is potentially very unsustainable for most of us in the busy, crazy lives that we lead. And then if I think about adding on what Pam and I were talking about before this, that kind of like next level of care that your kids need, which I've often explained to community groups and things who visited the hospital or the hospice where I used to work, as it's like having a newborn baby. forever. Like, these needs are intense and they don't diminish like they do. The special bag, that's the bag, your nappy bag for a baby, becomes the hospital bag or the doctor's bag that has all the relevant files, all the equipment we need. That this level of intensity makes putting in time for yourself and exercise and healthy eating and all these things far more complicated than it might be for other people. So how do we make it sustainable? How do we make sure that it's based in self-compassion and working on our own self-esteem and self-belief and self-worth, that we're worthy of this care? And so essentially, it's really about giving ourselves the care and compassion that we give to all the other people, including these special, beautiful children who are in our lives. And just again there, and it was on one of the earlier graphics, comparing ourselves to other people is very rarely helpful in terms of self-care, particularly because I don't know if any of you are fans. I follow this woman. I think her newsletter is called The Margin Alien, and she's the best read human on the planet, I'm convinced. And she puts out this newsletter, and I heard her speaking the other day, and she said, I'm trying to do some personal work at the moment because I've realized something will happen with a friend and I will create a story that it's about me, forgetting that that person has 10,000 other data points in their life that have nothing to do with me. And so often when we compare ourselves to other people, we're comparing ourselves to a social media story or to a segment of their lives we know about, and we don't know the whole picture. And so we're making unrealistic expectations of ourselves. I've already alluded to this one. It's really important, I believe, for you guys to really consider that you're in a very specific circumstance where there are enormous drains on your physical, emotional, and psychological energy. So how to start to map and be aware of what are your own triggers or things that challenge you. And an example I could think of is when things are out of routine. So for other people, well, we were having a conversation earlier about birthday parties, that for many families, they're like, oh no, they've got another birthday party on the weekend. But that sometimes when your kids are invited to a birthday party, it's a big emotional event. It might be the invitation that year. It might be the time you get to see them really included and treated with the love and respect they so deserve. And so just being aware and really tender with yourself. Perhaps when you go on holiday, which everyone else is like, yay, holidays. But you've got to pack that extra bag, be aware of what hospitals nearby, know that there's a doctor that the pediatrician recommends, whatever the specific circumstance, just being aware that even though the end point, a holiday, is a great self-care thing, the lead up does involve a lot of preparation and cognitive load and energy that might not be there for other people. And so what does that mean? Maybe it means the first 2 days of the holiday, there's no planned activities. There's just a bit of, we're going to veg on the couch and binge Netflix and get takeout and go to the beach. And that's the most we're going to do. But just really being mindful of what are the specific considerations for yourself and for the context of your own family. One of the things that I've learned a lot about in training to be a counselor and in my own therapy that I've done is the importance of being embodied. And again, I think it sounds like a bit of a woo-woo term, like, oh, embodiment. But in the Western world, we tend to literally create a division between our brain and our body. And certainly when I first went to counseling in a time of crisis, my beautiful counselor, who I still see 5 years later, would say to me, okay, now tell me where I'd be, and then this happened, and then and you won't believe it. And she'd go, okay, just breathe, Janet. Tell me where in your body you can feel that. And I remember literally thinking, this woman is a lunatic. No, but you don't understand. Then you won't believe what he said after that. It was so, and she'd be like, okay, I need you to stop again. Where can you feel that in your body? And if I could offer you guys one self-care practice to take away from today, it would be that when you feel activated, it might be extremely happy, it might be happy, but overwhelmed with those tears at that birthday party, that you take a second to check in with your body. What is this feeling that I'm feeling? Where do I feel it in my body? And what does this feeling need? Because the thing that we now know about feelings is, again, in the Western world, we tend to say feelings are emotions and emotions are cognitive. But feelings are called feelings because they're experienced by our nervous system. They're actually in our bodies and they need to be processed out of our bodies. And particularly the feelings that we tend to say are negative. And again, I could do a whole talk on feelings are not good or bad, positive or negative. They're just signals that our body's giving us that we need to attend to something. But things like anger, sadness, grief, they actually need to be processed out of our bodies. And we each have individual ways of doing that. For some people, it is running. For some people, it's debriefing with a friend. For some people, it's swimming. For some people, it's journaling. But how we can be in touch with where is that feeling in my body and what is that feeling telling me? So I've popped a little resource there. Again, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Canadian therapist called Hilary McBride. All of her work is around embodiment. She specialized actually in eating disorders, having suffered an eating disorder for a lot of her life. But just some really beautiful commentary about how in the Western world we tend to live up here and forget this body that we're living in and the connectedness of our mind to our body. So I'm reading this slide and it's actually giving me a giggle. I'm like, remember, you know yourself best of all. And the other thing I would add for you guys is remember, you know your child or young person best of all. And I hammer that home in every presentation I get to do with training doctors, with new nurses to the hospital. I spoke recently at a course of 200 pediatricians from across Australia and New Zealand. Back yourself. You do know your child or young person best of all. And if someone isn't listening, then escalate or find the person who'll hear you because your concerns are real and valid. Be very kind for yourself and know that self-care is something different for everyone. So your self-care might be completely different to the person next to you. And I think it can be a bit of a journey. Like for me, what I've learned, which I never would have known to be the truth, is I need time to myself. And 10 years ago, I was the dinner party. Every weekend was full of, so we'd go to a cafe and then there'd be a dinner party at night and then there'd be, and actually this growing knowledge that I need some quiet spaces. But there's going to be other people that's not what they need. So it's a really individual thing and it needs a little bit of time and reflection. So I've touched on this already. This is actually a slide literally ripped from my presentation that I did to all these pediatricians the other day. The reason it's important for us to be embodied and do that process I just discussed about our feelings is because there's actually a growing body of research that says when we try to push those feelings down and ignore them and go, well, I'm too busy, or I shouldn't feel angry about that, I'm overreacting, they must all think that I am a bit of a drama queen, we actually literally reduce the length of our lives. It has extremely detrimental impacts on our physiological health. So actually being present with all of our feelings, identifying what they are, identifying where they are in our bodies, and learning our processes is so important. And I love this quote. Again, if this is something you're interested in, this beautiful psychologist, Susan David, does a lot of work in the States centered around what she calls emotional agility, which is exactly what I've just described. And she was born in South Africa and she uses this beautiful greeting, which I love, which is Sabwona. I see you, and by seeing you, I bring you into being. And again, Pam and I were talking before this about how what most of us need is to feel seen and heard and safe, and how vitally important that is because we're built to be connected beings. So there's just some more resources here that you guys might find helpful. Emily Nagotsky is actually an incredibly renowned sex therapist, ironically. But this book that she's written, and the link here is to a talk with her twin sister, Amelia, was written after her sister Amelia had a nervous breakdown. And it's literally all based around this concept of feelings being in our body and that they're like tunnels and we need to work through them and come out the other side. So anything you find of their work, you'll find very helpful. Rebecca is a New Zealand therapist who used to be a high school teacher. Follow her on Instagram if Instagram's your thing. Subscribe to her newsletter. A little bit like the work on self-compassion that Kirsten Neef does. I love Rebecca's work because she sends just little bite-size. She's an illustrator, so beautiful little illustrations. Just a little exercise you could try today that will help you if you're feeling burnt out or like you're not coping. There's a link there to Kirsten Neef and more links to my favorite episodes of We Can Do Hard Things. There's one there with a psychiatrist talking about self-care, and their episode that was listed previously about self-care and how commodified it is in the Western world. And Jonathan Mead is another embodiment therapist from the States. And again, if you follow him on Instagram, if that's your thing, just puts up a 2-minute clip. Try this to process an emotion through your body. So super helpful. So in wrapping up, just really like that reflective question, what is in your self-care toolbox? What do you currently do? Is it working for you? I think it's just a really important conversation. And the little one that I've got there on the screen that is so simple, but I love it so much, is a feelings wheel. And again, I would encourage all of you to print one out or load one onto your phone. Brené Brown has done a ton of research following 7,000 people. And what she found was that people, when they're activated, only can identify 3 feelings: happy, sad, or pissed off. But if you have a look at that wheel, there's a lot more than 3 feelings that we experience. And I've found it very helpful. I've done it with my team at my other job to actually just put the feelings wheel on my workspace. And when something happened and I could feel myself actually going, what is it that I'm feeling? Am I outraged, or am I angry, or am I frustrated? And again, many of you will know the beautiful Dan Siegel, who's a very, very famous American psychiatrist who's done a lot of work in the parenting space. And he has this beautiful concept: we name it to tame it. Just by actually accurately naming the emotion, we reduce the intensity of it. And then we're more able to be with it, see what it's trying to tell us, and process it. I'm pretty sure that that's that. Let me stop sharing so we can hopefully.
Amazing. Thank you, Janet. We've had a couple of little comments in the chat, but very quickly before we jump to those, I just have two. You've spoken beautifully to self-care, and there's been so many incredible options and tips and tricks for people to start integrating it all into their life to really support them. I just very, very quickly, if we can just speak to some of the common signs that parents might experience that are signs of stress, anxiety, or burnout that they might not necessarily be aware of. And then the role that people such as yourself can play in helping families to navigate the emotional challenges that they're experiencing from caregiving.
Yeah, beautiful questions. I think that one of the first, because burnout can literally creep up on you. Like people don't end up in burnout because they realize they're severely stressed and they just let it roll on. They suddenly one day wake up and go, oh God, this isn't just stress anymore. This is burnout. I've really reached the end. The things to be aware of, I think, are if you and or your partner or a good friend or a loved one are telling you they're seeing changes in you. So if you're finding you're more short-tempered than you usually are, physical changes in your body, you're getting more bugs than you usually get, like you're getting sick more often than you usually do, you're tired, nothing satisfying. There's like a sense of just nothing. You can't find the show you want to watch. There's this general sense of irritation is what I want to say, or just not being able to be comfortable and sit within yourself. There's some of the signs there. I mean, they're like self-care, it manifests very differently in different
Yeah, of
people.
course.
But the thing I would really say is you do know yourself best of all. And so if you have some sense of, I'm not quite myself at the moment, check in on that. And check in on, sometimes a bit like the name it to tame it, sometimes just the process of going, okay, I am not myself. I'm feeling a bit more short-tempered. I'm feeling a bit itchy and irritated, and I can't quite I don't want to do the things that usually bring me joy. That's a big one. I don't want to call my friend. I feel annoyed that they're going to say the wrong thing and nothing is quite right. Sometimes even just writing a list of, oh my God, these 7 huge things have happened in the last 3 weeks. And that minute of self-compassion of, I hadn't clocked. It's been an enormous, exhausting time, and I've just kept going and going and going because sometimes that's the only choice that we have. And taking that moment, it can just de-escalate all of those feelings enough for you to come back to a baseline. In terms of working with, and different things work for different people, coaches, therapists, I'm actually going to speak with my personal hat on, not my professional hat for this one. When I have been through a couple of really challenging times in my life with different things, having that external objective person be able to mirror things to you, because when we're in crisis, our rational brain goes a bit offline and we go back to our amygdalas and we're a bit more easily triggered into fight, flight, freeze. So that ability to have someone, maybe you don't even have the wherewithal to write the list, and to have someone say, we've just been together for half an hour and these 6 huge, enormous things have happened to you in the last 2 weeks. Did you even know that? Is validating, which we all need. The most important thing, and it's what I try to spend a lot of time training people on in the hospital, what we all need, and you guys are experts at this with your kids, what we all need to be okay is to co-regulate with someone else when we're dysregulated. And again, you guys do this so beautifully with your kids who are experiencing health challenges and also with their siblings. As grown-ups, we kind of forget we need that too. And there is, of course, a place for self-regulation, but you actually can't become a person who can learn the practice of self-regulating yourself if you haven't had a reasonable amount of good, safe experience of co-regulation. And so I'm sure in this group, there's a variety of experiences. Many of you will have come from beautiful families where your parents or carers were able to give you that. But for some people, they never really received that in the way they needed. And so many of you will have seen, there's a lot in the trauma literature at the moment about the fact that trauma is not actually the thing that happens. Some people can be hit by a car and be fine, and other people are hit by a car and their life is never the same again. And it's not about the severity of the injury. The trauma really is about what happens inside of us, and that's often related to how we're responded to. So, I mean, burnout will again happen if you feel like you're constantly advocating for your kid and no one is hearing you, no one, and you feel very alone in that. And so what a counselor, a coach, a psychologist can do is really provide that space to validate you, to maybe show some of the reality, to give what we call psychoeducation, like to talk to you about some of these things and suggest some individualized resources that might be helpful for you. And I know I've gone way over time, so I could talk for another hour, but I'll.
It's okay. It's so interesting listening to you speak because it's just so relevant to everything that we all experience. But we're hearing like the validation, and sometimes we need an objective third party to mirror that back to really sit in and feel that validation. Beautiful. I am very, very aware of the time. Thank you so much, Janet. It's been amazing. We've loved having you here. It's always such a joy listening to you speak. And your information is always so enlightening and engaging, and we love it. So thank you. Thank you to everyone who sat and listened, given us your attention and your thoughtful questions. Thank you so much. As always, your presence here is really what makes these sessions so incredibly valuable. So as I said at the start, in the coming days, anyone who registered for this webinar will receive a link to the recording from today's session. With Janet's beautiful permission, you will also receive a copy of the slides that she shared today. I've collated a whole bunch of the additional resources as well. Janet's contact information will also be in that email. So for any of you that have really specific questions about care or tips and tricks that you would like to implement with interactions with your child or for your own self-care, please reach out to Janet. She's very happy to speak to anyone. And as always, jump into the Alongside Families community or on any of our messaging chats so that you can continue the conversation.
And if I could add 3 really brief
Of
points,
course.
what Pam's just said, the community you have is so important because, and Pam and I were talking about this before we jumped on, there's nothing more validating and connecting and calming to your nervous system than someone who genuinely can be empathetic because they actually genuinely understand the situation you're in. So the connection you guys have through community is such an important part of self-care that sometimes self-care can feel hard because of all the pressures, but do we want our children to grow up to constantly feel like there's not a minute for themselves and they're not deserving of that stuff? Sometimes we can learn to self-care by thinking of it as a service for our children. I'm going to do it because I'm going to show them. And sometimes it's as simple as, I need to take a 10-minute phone call to my friend because I'm having a bit of a rough day and I just watch Netflix for 10 minutes. And that's a start of role modeling. I have needs and they need to be met. So yeah, just really be kind to yourselves and please do reach out if you've got any specific questions.
You are always so generous with your time, Janet. Thank you so much. And just very quickly before we go, I'm just going to highlight some exciting things that is upcoming with Alongside Families. As you all are aware, school holidays are just around the corner, but very excitingly, we have some face-to-face events coming up in the school holidays. It's all on our website, so please make sure you check. If they're in your local area, please come and join us. We're so excited to be able to offer them to our families these holidays. And in the spirit of self-care and nurturing ourselves, next term we are running the Healthy Mothers, Healthy Families program again. So make sure you jump onto the Alongside Families website, check out all the events. There's a couple of different Healthy Mothers, Healthy Families sessions running next term. So find a time that suits you, jump in. It's all about self-care and prioritizing ourselves for our kids. Just like Janet was saying, we cannot continue to be sustainable informal supports for our kids if we do not look after ourselves. As always, kindness and grace to yourselves and to everyone around you. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We really do appreciate it. I hope you've gotten something wonderful out of today's session, and I'm really looking forward to sharing our next session with you next time. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.